Hey everybody, I forgot to hide the other banner. Hey, I'm back. It's been a while, um, but hopefully I'll do these more frequently this year. I'd like to welcome Reggie Bügmüncher.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I never knew if there was like a different pronunciation for the omlauts, but
Yeah. They're just meant to throw everybody hot off the trail.
I had to when I was writing the description, I'm like, oh man, I gotta like copy in the omlauts, make sure it's proper.
Yeah, because the keyboard situation is not good.
So I want to start with that. Has it always been your stage name, or did you kind of go through some other ones before you came up on that one?
No, it's always been my stage name. At some point, I probably should have changed it. But yeah, it just really stuck. I came up with I created Reggie as a name, like a separate personality, in a 10th grade biology class.
Okay.
So she was kind of a character that I created in high school that nobody really got, and I kind of just kept really quiet. And then when I started performing, I kept it. And then the Bugmuncher just came from starting off doing the geek act, and it was just a real play on words.
I was gonna say, were you dissecting something and just got really hungry and you're like,
Yeah, like Old City Sideshow was so funny. I look at us now and we were such nerds because we tried to do everything with the sideshow historically accurate. Like we couldn't talk our own acts. Like a talker should talk your act for you while you're on stage. And we just wanted everything to be so specific. We got so nerdy about all of it. And so, of course, the entry level act in the sideshow is, the geek act.
Right.
So me being the lowest person on the totem pole and with no other skills, that's exactly how I entered. So it was kind of the perfect name.
Which I don't know if everybody knows what a geek is in terms of sideshow. So I didn't know personally until I based on recommendation from somebody, I read a book called Geek Love.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you've read it. It's a fucked up book.
Yeah, it is.
But I learned a lot. I learned some things about creepy ass sideshow. But yeah, can you define that real quick?
So the geek act is pretty much it's an entry level act. It is probably the most unskilled act, and it's just eating live animals on stage. And the geek act can go from kind of like a insectivore act, which is a little bit more popular because it's easier to travel around with. But historically, it's like Ozzy Osbourne biting the heads off birds and chickens and things like that. That's a full geek act. So it could be pretty gross. A lot of people wouldn't really do mammals now, although I think there are probably some shows that do pinky mice. But it's hard to get some animals, and then other ones I think that people just aren't necessarily interested in that level of horror in real life anymore because we have movies and simulations for a lot of that stuff.
Right, and I'm sure a certain part of the audience will probably get turned off by that sort of thing. So
completely, I made the mistake of just showing up and thinking I was going to be doing an insectivore act at something that wound up being an animal fundraiser, and it didn't go well. And I was like, I don't know who you thought that you hired. It's in my name. And they were like, you're not doing this act here.
Right, like, oh, we didn't think it was literal. No, it's literal.
I know, like I'm not that funny. It's pretty literal. But yeah, we fixed it up, and it was still a great show. Rewrote it, but it was that moment that it really dawned on me that there was definitely large audiences that were not interested in the geek act at all.
How did you decide on what bugs to eat and how to start?
Luckily I knew enough people that had done the geek act before, and the stuff that I wound up starting off with was stuff that was accessible and affordable. So I started off with night crawlers, mealworms, crickets, and goldfish. Because it's all stuff you can buy at like pet stores and Walmarts all over the country. And then I learned how to clean them properly and take care of them, and I mean, take care of them in the sense of like prepping to eat them. I wound up having an incredibly bad reaction to some of them. And so I, for a long time, didn't eat any insects with an exoskeleton. So it turned allergic to anything with an exoskeleton, which is funny, which is hilarious how Bügmüncher still stuck around. Because technically I can't eat any bugs. Like I can eat night crawlers if I want to, or goldfish and stuff like that, but none of the actual bugs.
Right. But at that point, I guess you just have to carry on the name.
I just have to carry on the name, and I get weird presents, like all types of like little insects and gifts and all these other great things. I just can't do much with it.
So tell me how, generally what made you think, okay, let me try this sideshow business, circus business. I always wonder like how people get into that.
Oh, I went to a really great concert with a college boyfriend. We went to go see Los Straitjackets, and they're a surf rock band, and we went to go see them in Philly, and they had backup dancers, the Pontani sisters, and I was blown away by these 3 burlesque dancers. And for this particular tour, they had like choreographed dance numbers where they were dancing to the music, and I kind of just became obsessed with them. And so burlesque was kind of my gateway drug into the variety world.
Okay.
And I didn't know any burlesque dancers. I didn't meet any people like that. But what I did meet were 2 people that were starting up a sideshow. And I was like, I'm in. So that's
where was this, by the way? I guess
it was in Philly.
Oh, it was in Philly. Okay.
Yeah. And our ex-sword swallower, he had been doing pyrotechnics for Ringling Brothers, and Danny had gone to Coney Island Sideshow School. So,
okay. So
they were looking for somebody that they were looking for a feminine presence to join them on stage to make them a little more tolerable.
Right. Okay. And so I guess once besides the Geek Act, what other acts did you eventually expand to?
It was a slow progress of the stuff that I wound up doing. I wound up studying under Harley Newman, who's an escape artist, and he mentored me. But I wound up learning everything from straitjacket, chain, and rope escapes to beds of nails, beds of barbed wire, laying on a lot of pain-proof lady acts, the human blockhead, hammering stuff into your nose and putting tubes through your nose and mouth, mental flossing that, and then sword swallowing, glass walking. The only thing I haven't really done, I've been instructed on how to do it, but I just haven't really done it, and that's glass eating. Danny always did it in the show, and I never felt like I wanted to take that bit over, and I spent so much money on my teeth.
That sounds incredibly uncomfortable. And
yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen your show. There are parts of it that are somewhat uncomfortable. The eye thing or the eyelid thing is crazy to me.
Yeah, the eye thing gets a lot of people. A lot of people that are not grossed out by anything that I do, as soon as the eye hooks happen, they're done.
Did you learn that you have certain just tolerance for that sort of thing, or I don't, as a layman, I have no idea how much of it is tolerance, how much of it is skill, and how much of it is all those things.
Well, I mean, I think with anything like that, there's a big skill in presentation and performing. So like most stuff with sideshow, anybody can do it for the most part. If you want to, you can do it. A lot of it's mind over matter, being in control of your body. A lot of people, I think, are not really in touch with their bodies. I think that,
sure.
Yeah, and I think that when you're really in touch with your body, you really know that you're one of those people. You can feel when there's something underneath the bottom of your shoe, or you're not oblivious to something being on your arm or your face, anything like that. And it goes for things inside of you also. That you're hyper aware of what's right with your body and what's wrong with your body, like what feels right and what feels wrong. And so it makes things like learning how to sword swallow a little bit easier. If you're ever somebody that's like tried to, I like because I'll still gag when I brush my teeth if I go too hard or I'm not in the right mood and doing stuff like that. But in terms of sword swallowing, it's really a mind over matter, like focusing on myself and focusing on my body and what's happening in there. So anybody can do it if they really want to, but I think a lot of people just generally don't want to. And if they do want to, they might not be one of the people that was born or like hasn't really honed the skill of being in touch with your body and how it works and what feels good and what feels doesn't. And then once you do learn the skill set, then you have to learn how to present it. Because there's, I think like one year at the Hootenanny, this convention we did in New Orleans, we had like a night of 1,000 blockheads because it's one of the acts that everybody knows how to do.
Right.
And so everybody can do the act, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. You know, that's where a lot of the skill comes in. The skill comes into like, you know, physically, are you able to? Sure. I worked on learning how to physically do this, like ride a bike. But, you know, here I am, like the difference is like the people popping wheelies and like learning how to hop up on curbs. They make it a little bit more interesting. They have like cool outfits on.
Well, yeah, I mean, presentation is huge, right? I think performance art in general, right?
Yeah.
I think you have to be able to sell the show. It's like I freak out in front of people, and that like I've done like, you know, rope performances a couple of times. It was just wow. It's not natural for me for sure.
I think you get used to it. There's a lot of times, I mean, I'm still nervous every time I'm going to go to perform. I still get worried about it. Yeah, just practice time.
How did you get into more of like the circus side of things? Like with, I think like you're like, I don't know how to describe it, like the whole motorcycle and wire business.
Oh yeah, it's a motorcycle high wire thrill show. So as far as I know, it's the only all-female motorcycle thrill show in the world. And Una runs that. It's Circus Una. And it is basically a motorcycle on a high wire, but the high wire is on an incline. You drive the bike up the incline and then it slides back down into the base. And I wound up just being in the right place at the right time. I knew how to ride a motorcycle. So that was one thing already off the checklist of things that I would have to get taught. Yeah. And a lot of times with circus work, it really comes down to people being willing to do the work. If you want to join the circus, you can start off at the lowest level and work your way up incredibly quickly because the turnover it can be pretty rapid. People don't like being away from home. A lot of people aren't familiar with communal living. A lot of people aren't familiar with what it's like to have to work really hard in a community and kind of be on call and work, odd hours at odd times and be responsible for things that in other jobs you maybe wouldn't be responsible for. So, as everybody kind of leaves or has to get home or they get homesick or they find that they're unable to pound stakes in the ground or that they're not really interested in cleaning up popcorn or any of the number of things that could just really make you snap after being on the road for 16 weeks or so. As people find that they're not ready for that position, you just continue to climb all the way up. So you'll find a lot of people that do really well in the circus if that's where they want to be and if they're able to do that. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time and pretty hard
put in the work.
Yeah, just put in a lot of work.
I guess that's true for most things, right? I guess if you put in the work, if you have the right dedication, motivation, potentially, get ahead. And I'm always impressed by people doing that because I'm a person who, I try a lot of different things and I have a hard time like getting over that hump where like you learn it's like, hey, this is hard. You're not good right now, So, it like, okay, it's going to take a lot of work and I'm, not sure you can dedicate that. With photography, it was, I guess because it was less intense, so like I was able to, gradually just get better over time. I guess there wasn't as much of a, intensity involved with that. But I was, when I was playing with a band, that was a little different. Like it did require more work and, you're playing these shitty dive bars and, while you're still trying to have like a regular day job. And that, I don't know. Again, I don't know if were you, I guess, did you have like a day job that you were mixing in with, all the cover work,
Oh,
sideshow
geez.
work?
Yeah. Yeah. In the beginning, when I first started out, I was working a job during the day. I was in grad school and I was a single mom. So it was super busy.
I, I don't know. Now that I have a toddler, that just sounds by itself. It just sounds insane. You
Yeah,
know, I don't, can't even imagine.
it was nuts. I would, try to do like event invites and flyers and everything else, like on my lunch break or when it was slow. Everybody like messes around at work. And so I was just like constantly working. Even while I was at one job, I'd be doing the job for another job and just chugging along, pounding away, doing whatever I could. Um, but I guess if you have a passion for it, it's a little bit easier. Like, you feel like you progress faster at photography, but it's also like, something you might have been like a little bit more interested in. It has less of a downturn, I think, than like playing in venues and stuff, because then you have to deal with people and like disappointment and everything else. Whereas like, photography can be like a little bit more private of an art. You can, and everybody looks at a photo, and even if it's a bad photo, people are really like, wow, that's great. I love that. What an interesting perspective. But like you put on a bad show and you're like, oh Jesus, for these 5 people, oh, like it's so
Yeah,
unrewarding.
yeah.
So,
Certainly, like, okay, playing to 6 people and 4 of them are the band girlfriends. It's
yeah. I know it's like a
um,
nightmare. I know. I completely know it.
Also logistically, like, most of the time, photography is just, me and the model, or maybe like one other person, like makeup or something. But with a band or sideshow, whatever, there's a lot more logistics involved.
Yeah. Yep. It's trying to coordinate a bunch of people just to book the shows. Like, oh, are you available these 4 days in a row? Oh no. Great.
Yeah, I think the fact that you've been, somebody like you who's been successful with performance art like that, that already should be like on the resume. It's like, hey, I know how to time manage. I know how to organize people. I know how to, those people. I don't think people quite understand how much is involved. So
Oh yeah. And then being able to like do things like one of my greatest skills is just being able to kind of just figure things out on the fly. It may not be pretty and I may not do it well, but it sure happens. A friend of mine, James Taylor, always likes to say, like, it'll be a show. It'll be a show. It's going to happen and it's going to be a show. So,
I think another thing, music and anything, I guess anything you're doing on the stage shares, is the fact that shit goes wrong. You got to figure out how to go along with it.
yeah.
I like, I remember times when, I'd play the wrong note or forget where I am in the song. And I'm just like, shit, you try to get back. And what can you think of some like incidents you've had on stage where, you had to deal with improvising a little bit?
Oh, totally. I mean, there's been sound is constantly an issue for me at a lot of venues and a lot of places that I perform. Sound always seems to be an issue. I mean, for a multitude of reasons. Sometimes, the actual equipment just isn't exactly what's needed. Sometimes, there's no sound guy. Sometimes I'm just thrown up in a lineup with other people that have different sound requirements, and I just kind of get lost in the sauce. So a lot of times I'll get invited to come to a festival, and I've headlined at festivals where my only thing is like, here's my audio file, keep it playing low in the background.
Right.
Because I talk through all of my acts. And so I just want something low and in the background so I don't sound like a stand-up comedian. But after doing 20 burlesque songs where they're like, play it as loud as you can, mute all the microphones, like at the end of the day, I feel like sometimes the dude pressing the buttons is just like, whatever. It's another chick in a sparkle bra. Let's bump up the music and mute the microphone. So there's been times where I have had to, embarrassingly almost, on stage on a live mic, because they're not picking up on any body signals, because, especially that's why I hate closing a show. Like headlining a show is a nightmare. Like, give me an opener any day. Like, let me go knock it out of the park and then I can watch the show. And it's the greatest.
Okay.
But when you're closing it, it's kind of like people, the sound guy isn't watching or something like that, and it'd just be a real bummer. But I think it's like,
or just too drunk by that point.
yeah, that also, that's very true.
I know that happens. That happens with bands and sound
Yeah.
guys. Yeah.
It happens same way. It's, but it's also like why you don't see a lot of, movie stars doing Broadway. And I think it's just because live theater, live performance, it's like really hard, and not just really hard, but hard to come back from when you mess up or when things aren't perfect. You just can't yell cut.
Right.
Had a couple of weird TV experiences, and I think I could have done so much better at even like something like America's Got Talent if I had been kind of coaching myself or prepped better to go into a television experience, because in a television experience, you have all of the control to say, stop. I want this to look better. I want this to work better. I want all of it to be better. And the smart people have kind of been coached to do it.
But do you though? Because I always figured, like it's such a high pressure situation, but I didn't like, I kind of assumed that like you just have to, you don't have much control over it as a contestant,
It depends. Like, so you have some control. And if you have any complaints, the first thing they're going to tell you is that you had all the control as the act. Of course, you and I both know that you don't. But, you get past the hurdles, like your music copyright issues on air. You get past the issues of like things that may or may not be allowed that you normally do in your act. For example, like my angle grinder act. It took me weeks trying to convince the producers that I couldn't light things on fire with it. And like, I was just,
right.
And I was like, I know one of you has an angle grinder at home. One of the producers wound up coming into my house, and I illustrated on video for them while the other producers were watching that you just can't light something on fire with grinder sparks, that it's just hot metal. And I was like, it could melt your pantyhose for sure. Maybe a backdrop, but we're not going to have a problem with that. But one of the experiences I had on television, because they like to sabotage on reality shows. They want something to go wrong, so it becomes like their commercial clip or.
Sure.
So I kind of got set up as the bad guy on one of the shows, like in all leather and, doing aggressive acts. And then I was the only act where they didn't, makeup and wardrobe didn't cover up all of my tattoos because they wanted me to look bad. And then they left half my equipment off the stage. And being a live performer, the very first thing I do is just like, damn it. In my head, I'm thinking, God damn it. And I just think I have to keep rolling with it. But, if I had really, I think that's where like having a really good mentor and somebody in the industry kind of like really prep you for a lot of these things. I had heard nightmare stories, but I just kept thinking it wouldn't happen to me. And in reality, you just need to know that you're in charge of it. And when you're on TV, you have the opportunity to say, stop right now. And we're going to start from the top. So, but it's all like part of a learning experience, but it's also, why I'm not in pictures. It's why I'm on a stage.
So can you talk about some of those? You've had a few TV appearances. One very recently.
Yeah, that was actually my best one yet. It was I don't know what they're doing, but that was a very organized production. It was so on point. I did So You Bet Your Life with Jay Leno, and it was a trivia game show, which is really fun because I host a weekly trivia night in Sacramento on Wednesdays. And so I thought it was like really fun to be on a trivia game show. Went down to LA, and it was very organized, very easy. They weren't very weird. Everybody was really nice. Everything happened as they said that it would. And then I just got on a plane and came right home. It was lovely. It was like the best TV experience I ever had. The Gong Show was interesting. But that was one where, they left a lot of my equipment off onto the side, and my mouth was full of fuel because that was also part of my act with the grand finale that I never got to. It was very frustrating experience for me. And then America's Got Talent was a full-on nightmare. And they wound up not even airing the clip that.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yeah, because they air a couple of shows a day. I mean, they film them.
Right, sure.
And so I was going on at midnight after being there for like 14 hours. And they wanted too much for me, and I hadn't really learned how to say no and how to really because you really have to go in there strong, knowing exactly what you want to look like, exactly what you're willing to do. And sometimes with this competition shows, sideshow isn't really a good fit. I think they want it because it's shocking and disgusting and repulsive, and they want like, people like us that they can point and look at. But in reality, it's really hard to progress in those things to go, what are their, there's a reason sideshows are called a 10-in-1. It's 10 acts in one show.
Mm-hmm.
So there's pretty much like 10 basic sideshow acts. You can modify them however you want, but like there's going to be sword swallowing. There's going to be fire eating. There's going to be like maybe some stapling, maybe, but there's a handful of things that are sideshow. So what they like to do is they like to ask you to do a lot of them all at once. Could you do sword swallowing while you're on fire and doing a roll? So like they want you to push all these skills together to make it more outrageous.
Whoa. It sounds like what I did of our photo shoot.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I was like looking at that picture and I was like, this was so bonkers. I was like, everything, like, but that's also kind of like that magical wild energy of just like, let's just do this, and then like, what if we lit everything on fire, and then like, what if there was this and that, and like, and then when you can make something as crazy as that actually happen, it's hilarious. But it doesn't work on America's Got Talent, because if you were to blow all of your acts in 2 shows, it's like, what the hell are you going to do for the next 10 weeks?
Right. Yeah. So maybe we can do a little sidestep into like the photos we took.
Yeah.
So we met each other, because of my photography, right? I don't remember how exactly we, I guess, got in touch. I don't know if you do, but yeah, eventually, we're talking about doing a shoot, and I was kind of like, well, what, what are some of the things you can do? And then you mentioned you had a fire breather that can help, and then, I was doing rope at the time, and still am occasionally, and I was like, okay, what's how can we how can we combine all of these things, and so let me show. I'm going to share the photo, and we can talk about it a little bit. So let me pull that up. So first, this is you doing your angle grinder act, which, a very fun outfit. I guess
Yeah.
customized for that sort of thing. So yes, this does not normally set things on fire, but looks amazing. It's very fun to take photos of. So that was kind of like the warm up.
It's still such a great photo. That might be like the best photo that's ever captured that act. It's just a hard act to capture too.
Yeah. And then so this is this is when we had you tied up, suspended over a bed of nails, which you maybe can't see too well, and then soap aside.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Doing the fire breathing at the rope. So I was when I think this actually kind of came to my mind because of something my wife suggested once. Just like, wouldn't it be cool if somebody was suspended by rope and like the rope was on fire? I'm like, that sounds extremely unsafe.
You're like, let's put a bed of nails underneath it.
But then, like, I was like, I wonder if there's a way to do it safely. So I started Googling it, and you can buy like basically like fire resistant Kevlar rope. So I have, I still have like 200 feet of. I'm like, what do I do with this rope? Because unfortunately, the color is not very cool. It's like a weird like yellowish
Yellowy.
color. But it doesn't light on fire. So so we did this, yeah, and we're like, okay, let's yeah, let's throw the bed of nails underneath and fire. So that hey, I feel like it worked out pretty well. How was your side of that shoot?
That was awesome. That was really I think I'm trying to even remember if that was before the Bride of Frankenstein.
That was before, yeah.
Yeah, so that was before. So this was like, I think actually like my first rope suspension.
Okay.
which like makes this like even crazier because I was just like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's like,
sounds
all right,
wild.
for my first rope, I'm just gonna like, do this.
Yeah, it was like, but I think that we had such a good team in there. Like that art space was just
Yeah,
unbelievable.
thank God we had somebody who let us do this in somebody's space. Because imagine like, you need a hard point, and you need, need enough room, and you need people to be okay with fire breathing, which, yeah.
Yeah. Like I think about like the logistics that would have to be involved to do a photo shoot like that now, and I wouldn't even know where to go or what to do.
I wonder, actually, like from a performance perspective, I assume there's some kind of like performance insurance involved, or
Yeah.
and I, like how do you like explain to insurance companies like, this is what I do, can you cover me, please?
Yeah, and I wonder too, because like the policy I have specifically lists like fire, eating, and breathing, and different types of you puts you in. There's 2 or 3 different categories, and then like you could buy the combo category, but then there's also additional add-ons for your volunteers and for your assistants and all this other stuff. And I don't even know what I would file an accident like that under. It's the thing. Like, would it be under the fire policy? Like,
Okay, good thing nothing happened. Phew.
I know.
But like you said, we did have a good team. We had a fire safety on board, and so we were prepared. We weren't just fucking around. So
Yeah, it was,
don't do this at home. Like I said, unless you take the proper precautions. But yeah, thank you, thank you for doing that. I still feel like that was one of the coolest photos I've taken.
yeah, it's so, and everybody there was really great. Like makeup people, hair people. I feel like I still have those hair extensions. Like it was just everything was like so top notch. Yeah,
Good,
that one
good,
was wild.
good
And
thing
then
we didn't burn that.
yeah, yeah, and then even with the Bride of Frankenstein shoot, like I think using that picture for the promo was pretty cool too, because that was another like crazy like wild suspension.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the rare shoots where I was not taking photos. I was doing the rope. I was just that was B
But I feel like
squared.
it was so good to have you there though too, just because you were like, ah, listen, this angle, you need to look over here. And so I feel like having other people with multiple skill sets at that shoot too was wild. Like my friend Froy was there. I mean, and like he just came to like help carry in the Tesla coil.
Oh yeah,
And he wound up being like such a great help too.
involved. Yeah, that was a lot of fun different elements together too. So even if, different shoots or different shots.
Yeah.
So what are your kind of some of your highlights from your performances? Would you say? So somebody mentioned this earlier, so I do want to talk about that. We showed you being suspended by rope, but that's not. You said that was your first rope suspension, but it was, I assume, not your first suspension.
No, wasn't. I've done pierced suspensions before that. And I had actually my first suspension was in that art gallery, that very same place where we did my first rope suspension. Now that I think about it, it's kind of hilarious. Yeah, I've probably suspended, less than a dozen times. I had a really, really good time every single time I suspended. One time in San Diego that stands out. I went down to one hook, and just like nothing crazy. Wasn't doing like knees or resurrections or anything nuts. And yeah, I just didn't calm down, and I was still swinging really hard and completely like almost ripped all the way out. But it was like an experience. And then I had to go get stitches at the tattoo convention, which was
For somebody who's never experienced it like myself, how would you describe being hook suspended?
it was really strange. The people that I worked with were my friends, Gisela Rose. I don't know if you met her, but
I have. I've shot
yes,
them.
I thought you did. Yeah. So she had like worked with me and she was a close personal friend. So my first suspension was with her and she was really amazing. Um, I think the feeling that you get, like the piercing happens, and that's a little bit odd. If you've ever had your ears pierced or done like any piercings, you kind of know what that's like. It's like, wow, and then it's over. That initial, oh my God. And then you're like, oh, wow, that was it. Okay, cool. I can live with this. And then you feel a little bit of pressure. I think going up was really the most uncomfortable thing is what I did to myself mentally in preparation for what was going to happen. There's a lot of pressure. It feels very weird. It's very strange. And it starts to be a little painful. And then you impulsively just clench up and get very nervous and you make it worse for yourself than it actually is ever going to have to be. It's one of those things where the more you move and the more relaxed you are, the more you're going to enjoy it and you won't be in pain regardless of what it looks like. You're not, your adrenaline's rushing and it's so euphoric that if you really lean into it, it's going to be a great experience. If you're unable to lean into it, you're not going to have a good experience. If you tense up really tight, it's going to become more painful. You're not going to swing. You're not going to get the full experience. You're just kind of going to hang there and clench up, and it's going to be pretty strange and uncomfortable.
Yeah, it seems like it's very much, you have to be in the right headspace, and from my friends who have done it, you hear these kind of they describe it as a kind of a cathartic experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, I'm going off of their experience, but I guess if you're in the right mind space, then it can work out.
Yeah, you just want to clear everything out of your mind, spirit, body. But yeah, you definitely don't want to go up there in a bad headspace and really trip out about it. You got to be hydrated,
I mean, there's definitely some things in common with rope suspension, right? Some of those things are also true. Like you also have to be in the right mind space, and you have to be hydrated. And there's the concept of transition pain, where that's you once you get past that, you're it feels different.
Yeah, and learning to be vulnerable. Learning to be vulnerable, get over your physical pain and experience everything else that's happening. It's kind of magic. I mean, like at rope suspension, pier suspension, all those things, like you're not in control of that, and you're really hoping that everybody that's on your team knows exactly what they're doing and that they're in control of their stuff so that you can just really focus on yourself and what you're going through emotionally and physically and mentally.
Right. It's also, there's quite a bit of trust involved, and that, you're experiencing that kind of trust exchange with somebody else. It's also something we don't necessarily go through often enough in our daily lives, I would say.
Yeah. I think that's why when you meet a lot of people that are interested in suspending or doing stuff like that, they tend to be a little bit, on some level, I don't want to say like more accepting. That's probably not the right word, but just like a little bit more understanding and vulnerable. People that have like made themselves available in a space where they had to trust other people to experience some type of growth.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So since we didn't mention it, how did you end up working with Jane's Addiction?
Oh, actually, it was when Steve Truitt, I guess, I don't know if he's still doing all of their shows, but he was the piercer that was suspending people. We were on the same convention too, circuit. So he was doing the suspensions at the Villain Arts shows for a long time, but then also doing them for Jane's Addiction. And they needed a second girl. So for the entire tour, they had two girls that were going up for the grand finale, suspended and going through the stadiums, swinging throughout the entire finale, which was kind of great because like Perry Farrell like grabbed my legs and like swung me across like the entire audience. And I was like, oh, this is the coolest thing ever.
Yeah. If anybody has seen video of it, like, or saw it live, like it's crazy because you're like, I guess the length from which you're suspended is pretty long, so there's
crazy
a lot of movement.
Yeah, like that ceiling, because that was like the Starlight Ballroom in North Jersey or something, but it was
Starland?
huge. Yes, or something. Like I'm like Starlight.
Starlight Ballroom, yeah.
Yeah, that was like, I mean, because it was a stadium show. Like I'm trying to think about like how long even that rope was. I mean, because I was at some points like 30 feet up in the air, but then the ropes themselves, God, I don't even know how high those ceilings were. The video's pretty awesome.
Right. It definitely looks amazing, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's a trip. I love that they do that though. I love that they've taken like counterculture and smashed it into something that's, because Jane's Addiction is like, I feel like, I know that this is hurtful to say it out loud to most of us, but like they're on classic rock stations now.
Oh yeah, no, I'm well aware.
So they're like, they're pretty run of the
you,
mill rock
you,
band. Your dad listens to them, but like, so for them to take something so counterculture and something so shocking and something that makes people so uncomfortable and to make it the finale of every show for their tour is pretty progressive and awesome.
yeah, I definitely appreciate, what I'm not necessarily as much of, musically fan of theirs. I like some of their stuff, but I just never got into it, particularly. But I mean, you watch those shows, live, and you can sense what the kind of energy they put out, and I think anybody who's into music, who's into live performances, can appreciate that.
Yeah, they're super cool.
So, so besides Jane's, what have been some of your more memorable experiences, on the road? Obviously you have to travel quite a bit with your, the sideshow and everything else you've done. Yeah. So I'd imagine there's some adventures.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate. I have like, I think, good stories, bad stories, kind of like what the hell stories. I've been, stranded in cities. I feel like I've seen the best and the worst of people.
Those are all good, bad and good and what the fuck experiences, that'll qualify as long as it's memorable, and you made out okay.
Yeah. I guess like one of the more interesting memories that I had was kind of my last gig pre-COVID was pretty intense. Just because I had been in New Orleans performing for the weekend, and then I hopped on a plane and headed to Tampa, went to Gibtown, and headed across Florida to go do a fair. Took a couple of days setting it up, like putting up the tent, doing everything else. And then on the day that we were supposed to open, everything closed. And so then I had a gig in Chicago the next weekend, and then that got canceled. And then the weekend after that got canceled. And it was like I was just kind of stranded in Florida and didn't really know what to do. And then we just kind of like took the tent down, closed the show back up. And it was a really surreal experience, because I think that as a performer, there's this idea that like the show is always going to happen. Like there's never been something so bad that I haven't done my show. I've performed outside when there's been problems with a venue. I've, accommodated every single issue that I ever would have had to. And it was the first time where it was just like, no, like you just don't work anymore. And that was really intense. That was super memorable for me. And I think in terms of like, God, I've had some like really funny disasters, amazing ones. One time, one of the acts that we thought were great was hiding me in little boxes, because I could contort myself into like these boxes. And Danny had bought this Rubbermaid container, and the idea was they were going to carry it out and put it on the ground and just use it as a table for maybe 2 or 3 acts. Nobody would even know I was in. And then, brah, ta-da, she's in the box. It's hilarious. Right. And it was just like some dumb thing that us cockamamie weirdos came up while we were drinking and hanging out or whatever. And the night before, Danny thought that I needed more air holes. So he drilled too many, and it actually compromised the integrity
of the structure. Yeah.
The whole time. And then to make it worse, we showed up at this event, and it was, a super duper wealthy area, and they were basically having like a battle of the bands for all their like high school and junior high kids. They had giant stages everywhere and all these young kids and like their very wealthy parents that were, I guess, putting them through putting on a concert for them, I suppose is what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And they brought me out from the back in the box, and the whole bottom of the box fell out, and I like tumbled across, like, I mean, rolled out, like it was dramatic, and nobody even made a noise. Like there wasn't even like a weird chuckle. There was nothing. It was pretty awful. And Danny like giggled, but like got it together. We were like, all right, we're just going to get this gig over with. And then I had a weird experience earlier that day where I had to go buy my goldfish to swallow. And I had gone into the place and they had small goldfish and very large goldfish. And I asked the woman, don't you have anything in between? And she said, well, what size tank is it going into? And I rubbed my belly. I thought I was so funny. And I was like, it's going in this size tank. And she was like, what, are you going to eat this fucking goldfish? And I was like, bad joke. And she was like, damn right. And like handed me this bag. She was very unhappy about me eating the goldfish. And so I went to this event with a goldfish that was too big for me to swallow.
Oh, no.
And so I drank it. This is after the tumble that didn't knock anybody dead at this child band practice we were hired to perform. And I got it halfway down, but then the gills kept opening, like flapping really hard, and they started cutting the inside of my throat because they're pretty sharp. And then I'm coughing and cough it up into the air. And I wish somebody had this recorded, but Danny actually caught it in like one of our cups. And somebody started screaming, for the love of God, put some water in there. Like they just looked at us like we were the biggest pariahs. Like we never should have been there to watch, It was hilarious, but it was a very memorable experience. It was very humbling.
Yeah. Would you consider that to be your, like, obviously maybe not, not the difficult audience, but was that your most unusual audience? Because like I'm thinking back to band days. I think the weirdest show we ever played, we got hired to play at some like some restaurant party or whatever. So we, we're like, okay, whatever, it's a little money, whatever, it's fun to play. We show up there, it's somebody's 100th birthday, and we're like, did you listen to our music? We like, I mean, we're not metal, but we play rock. It's like we might kill some of these people.
Yeah.
But they're like, yeah, just play. We're like, okay. So we have these like, these like really old folks like dancing to our music, which is very, very surreal. We tried to adjust it a little bit. The drummer got like the jazz sticks and stuff, but it was very, very, very unusual audience.
I would love to see that. It's like, yeah. I mean, we've had a lot of really strange experiences. I mean, we've done kids parties. And I don't mind doing kids parties at all. I think they're really fun. I get along with kids because I'm like just a giant one myself. But Danny has always been somebody that's like, the children, wow. So like sometimes that works out.
Well, you also had, you're also a mom, right? So
I know, yeah.
I feel like, until I had a kid, I was like children are aliens. I have no idea what to do with them.
Oh, some of these kids were so great. Like there was one kid, I think Danny had no idea what to do. And it was this is probably his most awkward story. It's pretty awkward, but I found it hilarious just because he doesn't recover well from awkward moments. Whereas I find them hilarious. He's just like, oh my God. One of the kids had experienced burning. Like he had been in a fire. So we had a lot of scars from fire. And then when I went to go do my fire act, the kid looked at Danny and said, I was burned before. You shouldn't play with fire. And it was something along the lines where he said it like real serious. And I was like, Danny, I was like, that kid is fucking with you. That kid knows exactly what he's doing. He was like 10. I was like, the kid deserved a high five. But instead you got like so scared. It was so good. But that was like definitely one of the things that like I remember Danny just looking at me like, oh, what do I say?
It's hard with kids because you're not if you're not sure, and
Well, kids don't know anything's wrong until you tell them that there's something weird. You know what I mean? So I think that's why they love fucking with grown-ups, because we have all these weird hang-ups. We have these like weird problems. But in reality, like if you just act normal about stuff,
yeah,
kids are never going to know anything's weird.
yeah, and I also kind of wonder if sideshow works differently for kids, because for kids it's just okay. Here's something fun. Where else adults are like, oh my god, freaks, do something weird.
Yeah. Yeah, kids stare because they're curious. Adults stare usually because I don't think they stare that much. I think they get like really uncomfortable. We try to self-police ourselves, and then we wind up like making ourselves like a little bit more shitty.
Is it fun for you to occasionally make people uncomfortable?
Yeah, I think it is. I think I had like a really weird childhood. I wasn't somebody that I didn't feel generally accepted a lot, and so I think that I don't think that I bought into the whole like any attention's good attention, but I definitely felt a way to carve out my own power in environments that I thought that I had none. And so whether or not that's just kind of like horrifying people, or whether that is making somebody like, sick with something that I'm doing, I'm in control of that situation. I grew up like as a military kid, moving almost every year. I lived in other countries. I look at the amount of schools that I went to just in grade school, and it was a lot, like making friends every year, having to figure stuff out. And then like also I didn't, like most people, my parents didn't like each other. So I think that I wound up kind of carving out my own way. And the way that I found my power was really just in taking control of a room and kind of being like, do you want to see something real weird? Look what I can do. So I've always been a little bit of a show off in that way, but I do enjoy it. In sideshow, when somebody passes out, we call it a falling ovation. I got to perform at the Winchester Mystery House this past Halloween. I got to do like 20
nice.
shows. It was so cool. And I had somebody faint, and it was really excellent. And then the following week I performed at a drag event here, and I made somebody throw up. And I was so excited. Like it's one of the few jobs where, I'm also like, being from Philly, there's not a lot you're going to say that's going to make me cry. I've been called every name in the book. Like, the whole saying, where no one likes us, we don't care. But yeah, you're just like, oh, you're so disgusting. And then in the sideshow, you go, thank you so much.
But also those kinds of reactions are so, you can't fake those, right? You've affected somebody,
Yeah,
viscerally. So
yep. And they couldn't even control it. If somebody just passed out, shook them.
Love it. Now, what as on the other side, is there other acts or performers that you love to watch as an audience member?
Oh, there's a lot. Geez. As an audience member, I mean, the crew that I do the Villain Arts conventions with are really awesome. And they're a pretty diverse group of performers. So I really enjoy that. It's Captain and Maybell doing sideshow. And, their act is just, it's dangerous, but also family friendly, but also very tongue in cheek and adult. So they managed to like wrap all of that up in a really great package that's delivered well. And then there's another performer, Jim Maltman. He is like a ringling crowd, and he's got like he can do all of the actual like hand-eye coordination types of skills that most of us in sideshow don't have. And then Alakazam is, he does like Chinese pole, machete juggling, like that type of, and busking. So those are three performers that I could watch nonstop. And I enjoy it because even when their show in and out, when things are going right and when things are going wrong. And just watching another performer that is so skilled be able to handle any of it is always inspirational and impressive. I like them. Trying to think of like Don Leslie is pretty much the performer that I look up to when I look at sword swallowing and I look at other performers. I mean, he was a tattooer and a sword swallower, did carnival, did circus, did sideshow, did the whole shebang, did nightclubs, tattoo conventions while he was tattooing also. But he's like the reason I wear cowboy boots on stage. It's part of his costume. But he also, you know, I think was of a similar disposition as me.
Right.
Not too much of a people pleaser, which got him into trouble sometimes. Yeah, I mean, I'm so fortunate to know so many good performers. I've seen so many great performances. It's really hard to narrow down. I mean, I could definitely tell you what I don't like watching.
Okay, do share. Yeah.
Um, I think I've just seen too much of a lot of things. I'm very sick of seeing the same things everywhere, and I've been around long enough that I see stuff in cycles. You know, it's kind of like how our clothes are cool again now with young people.
Sure. Yeah.
It's the same thing with different songs, different genres of stuff. And it's almost like every city that you go to, you see these people not breaking out of the box. There's always like one burlesque troupe that covers themselves in blood. And then there's the one burlesque troupe that like, you know, focuses only on one thing. And you just start to see a bunch of stuff like that. And I think that that's really boring. I think that like doing what's expected is really boring. I think that's also why I like to really femme up my appearance and try to look as attractive. And I think that's why I'm a good fit for burlesque shows a lot, is because I present that way. And then I come out and I do some things that are really disgusting. And I think that juxtaposition of like what you're looking at versus what you're getting is the shock, and the unexpected development in the act is exciting. I want somebody to come out who's unconventionally beautiful and make me fall in love with them. Like I want somebody who is like looking very small coming out and doing a strong lady act. You know, like I want something to impress me. And I can't stomach kind of generically pretty girls lofting around. You know, I mean, it's like watching ballroom dancing for me, which, like, you know, for 5 minutes in a show, I can definitely do that. I can watch 5 minutes of ballroom dancing. Like, yes, your makeup's hair, it's beautiful. You're fantastic. You're the most perfect size 4. Those feather fans, they're $1,000. I love this whole thing. It's nice. But do I want to see it again? Not really.
Right. And I mean, I think to an extent, sometimes people are just, you know, when they're more on their like ascending arc of performing, you know, it's hard to do something necessarily original right away. So I'm sure everybody goes through the period where you're just emulating.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think what you said about, you know, kind of bypassing expectations or surprising people. I mean, to me, I find that very much true of music, what I listen to and what I like to see. There's a lot of bands who are like very technically skillful, but they just leave you empty because they don't surprise you. You know, there's not that, you know, those moments that give you goosebumps. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think it's very hard, but I think, you know, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah. Giving people something they weren't expected. You know, like that engagement. I just feel like I sound like a really old grandma. I have some other performer friends that I'm friends with that, you know, like we've been around a long time. So we've seen a whole lot of things. It's like everybody in the sideshow is a reverend or a doctor, or like, you know, like everybody does like.
I'd like to see their license.
Yeah, it's.
You have a license to officiate weddings, right?
I do. I'm a wedding officiant. I'm a minister with the Universal Life Church. And so I've been trying to work on that with an event planning company that I'm starting in Sacramento here. Because as I phase out more of performing. I'd like to, not that I don't want to perform forever. I do. Just that sideshow is a very grueling thing, and I'd really love to perform only when I want to,
Right.
and do only things that I want to, and have a company that hires other younger performers and gives them all the opportunities that somebody gave me. Like, it's my way of giving back, but also having a job that's maybe a little bit more consistent and less taxing on my body physically. Because even now I started swallowing swords again. And like just in the past month, I've swallowed only like 4 or 5 times. And I'm just like, oh, now I remember. Oh.
It's not like riding a bike.
I mean, on some level it is, but you're just kind of like, why do I keep getting on this bike? Like, this bike rides like shit.
I should have put a seat on it.
I know, it's like that. You're just kind of like, oh man, oh yeah, well.
So I would ask, like, what, like, in terms of in terms of your future, what are you looking forward to? Is there anything you have, any ideas you have in mind that you would share?
I am the thing that I'm concentrating most on in the next 6 months, at least performance wise, is really tightening up all of the acts that I'm doing. I'm redoing 2 different acts right now, completely new music. But I went from a 2-person show that I had with Danny to, for the most part, with conventions, doing them just by myself. So I was doing a 45-minute show with another person, and now I'm doing it alone. And that is it's a difficult transition. I think I'm handling it well. Like, the show's getting done. The show's happening. It's a show. But my need for volunteers or assistance with a lot of stuff is something that I want to get past. Because previously the show was designed where Danny and I were each other's volunteers, were each other's
Right.
assistants, somebody to hand you something, somebody to clean up after you, somebody to help you out with everything, whip targeting, bringing people up to help me out with just little things. I'd like to, I need to build equipment that makes me more self-sufficient. I love having audience volunteers in the show because I love the audience involvement. For me, I take a lot of pride in being able to control a room, to be able to control a crowd under any circumstances, but also to like bring them in and let them experience it. Because I feel like, you have a lot of volunteers that are going to leave a weekend and say, like, I got to be a part of that. And it was real. And I got to touch everything. And let me tell you all about it. And then those pictures, they do more for my show than anything I post, is these people's experiences. It's pretty
Right.
bad.
Yeah, I always see, like, watching performances like yours, they call for volunteers. I'm like, I don't know if I'm brave enough. What are we gonna do?
And that's another thing too. Like, there's nothing worse than being on the stage and like actually needing somebody to assist you and not having anybody there to do it.
Right. You need somebody who's, at least a little guts.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's where I'm going in the next couple of months, is just working on that, trying to build my company, trying to get some more private events up here. I want to start doing more of the things that I used to do back home, but in my new home. So
Yes.
I have a lot to explore in Sacramento, and luckily there's no sideshow here. There's like ironically, it's funny because, every town has like their politics and, their situations. But there's 2 other sword swallowers in Sacramento, and none of them are working. And then there's, 2 in San Francisco, about an hour and a half away. But they go back and forth between like Berlin and New York, both of them. So there's not a sideshow scene here like there is like, like in New York or Baltimore or Philly. So, and that's what I'm used to. I'm used to like all this stuff here. So I'm like, yeah, it's going to be fun to make things happen.
Like, you are the scene.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely want to like help make the scene happen and make it a little bit more inclusive for different types of art. Cause I think in terms of performance art, there's a lot of some things happening here, but I'd like to see a lot of everything happening here, including sideshow.
Well, actually, I would ask, since you've been around for a while, are there any kind of, how would you compare the state of, sideshow now versus, when you started? Like, well, when I talk about, for me, for example, like the rope scene, right? Rope scene is extremely different, I think, now than when I started, right? For one thing, there's a lot more resources now. It's a lot easier, and it's a lot more out there. I mean, there's a million people doing it, and also demographics are very different, right? It was, when I started, it was very white male dominated, and now it's very different. So I'm curious if there's any kind of changes that you've seen.
I try not to sound like the old person at the show. And I'm gracefully reminded by my elders in Sideshow that popularity of a lot of art forms is cyclical. And so I have to remind myself that when I started off in Sideshow, nobody gave two shits about Sideshow. It was for like crust punks and scumbags and carny weirdos. And what was really huge was burlesque. And then burlesque exploded, and kind of like we were constantly opening up for burlesque shows. And then burlesque exploded and kind of oversaturated the scene. And there was like a burlesque show. There were several every night of the week, anywhere in the city. And then it got to the point where it was so oversaturated that it kind of took a dive. And then that's when Sideshow came up. And then the burlesque girls were opening for us. And, so it's kind of like this weird cycle of what's going through. And then, in Sideshow, we saw like the rise of everybody in clown makeup, which is what we also like to refer to as clown media, because it just like we just watched it spread everywhere. Like all of a sudden, everybody's in clown makeup, and it was wild. And then, of course, there's the entire apprentice model. Was this something that has changed? When I studied under people, I learned how to do things from other people. I got permission to use certain acts. They were like handed down, kind of like a tattoo apprentice. You put a lot of your time in, you do a lot of the grunt work, you do the shit jobs nobody wants to do. And then you get to do your own stuff, and then people respect you. And I've seen a lot of that change too, just from like accessibility, like you said, there's sword swallowers there now that are like learning on YouTube. And it's because
it's just crazy to me, by the way. It's one thing to learn rope, but which is bad enough as it is, but
yeah. And I mean, there's one in particular that I think of, like anytime that I've ever wanted to put on airs and, act really shitty or talk down about anything like that. Like I know another performer that literally taught themselves on YouTube because there was nobody willing to mentor them. Right. And if it comes down to like, if there's 300 sword swallowers in your country and nobody's going to teach you how to do it, and you're really determined to do it, somewhere between this whole apprentice model and like keeping things the way that they need to be, like there has to be an invitation for people to come in. And that person is a great sword swallower, excellent performer. Like nobody, like I think I remember when they told everybody backstage, they were at a huge event and everybody was putting on airs about like, oh, well, I studied under this person and I did this and that. And then they wanted to be cocky and condescending, and they asked where that person learned. And she turned around and was like, I learned on YouTube. Now watch me go kill it on stage. And I was like, oh my God, she's so cool. And that's like that. You got to really change your mindset. Because, you can have apprentice systems, you can do all that stuff, but you better make room for the people that want to do it.
Right. Yeah. It also, like, it can be a crutch sometimes too, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how, you mentioned, you're in Sacramento now. What are your observations of having, compared to Philly, having left Philly? I mean, it's very, I haven't been in Sacramento, but I've been in, general area, but yeah, it's very, very different in general.
I have lived a couple of places in California now. I lived in LA for a bit. I lived in Riverside County in the middle of nowhere. I lived in Palm Springs, and now I'm in Sacramento. And I have to say, this is definitely like my favorite place in California to live. Palm Springs is beautiful. It's very cool, but I don't know that there was many opportunities for the kind of things that I'm looking to fill my time with that I find like really fulfilling. Um, but I think it's similar to Philly. Like my son was just out here this past week, and we were just joking around a lot, calling it West Coast Philly, because it's another working class city that's 90 miles from a huge city that everybody compares you to, even though you're just kind of like way better.
Mhm.
Like, you know, like,
Yeah.
I mean, like, you could go to
Little brother syndrome, huh?
yeah, you know, so you could go to New York or San Francisco and step in a bunch of human shit, or you could just like kick it in Sacramento or Philly and have the best time, you know, like, and it's also just like Philly, it's a city, but you know, with two rivers, which is kind of wild because everybody in California is far more active in terms of outdoor life, at least in my experience. So like, I never went down to any parks at Schuylkill or the Delaware. Like I went down to the Promenade, I went down to like Delaware Ave, like going to the movies. But here, like, there's an entire culture around the two rivers, which I guess is the difference. But it's got like a very working class culture. It's got kind of like this chip on your shoulder, but kind of like sense of hometown pride that Philadelphia has. And it's got like the whole dual river situation. Um, so I think it's very similar. The West Coast, there's still a lot of stuff about the West Coast that is very strange to me, and I just don't get. But this is the closest thing I've found to like people being pretty normal.
And what is normal?
Normal for me. I mean, like in saying like, you know, coming from Philly and being like, you know, it's normal. It's like Philly. Like everybody else in the world would look at you like you're nuts.
Right.
Like, oh, that place.
It's always funny to me, like, you know, the whole Philly New York rivalry. Like I live in Jersey, I'm in the middle. You know, like I have connections to both, and it's just kind of funny to me.
Yeah. Well, and then Jersey gets weird too, because if you're North Jersey, you're a New Yorker, and if you're South Jersey, you're Philadelphian, and then nobody acknowledges Central Jersey.
Yeah, which is me, right? So like I don't feel like I'm the suburb of either, right? It's like it just is, right?
You're hiding out in Central Jersey.
But also means to go anywhere to do anything, I have to drive somewhere. You know, there's I you know it there is a sense of like, okay, there's not enough culture happening in like where like there's not a lot of places I can go hang out and see like, you know, creative people. I mean, New Brunswick is, you know, Rutgers, right? So it's in a university town. So that's to an extent that's happening there. But outside of that,
Yeah, California is really everybody here loves to drive cars. They love driving. Um, I think it's a cultural thing here too. Because there's been a lot of places in California where I've seen public transportation and it's readily accessible. And it's like when I was in Riverside County, I tried to ride the train as much as I could into LA, and it was empty every single time. Like nobody's on the trains, nobody rides the trains. Everybody's just in cars.
which is weird to me considering how much traffic there is. But
yeah, and then the places that do have public transit, it's kind of like it's only going to be easy if you need to get from one spot here to one spot here. And it's very rare that that line's going to match up. You know, for the most part, you know, there's no pedestrian paths to walk somewhere, even if you parked somewhere else. Like it's very strange. The layout wasn't set out for public transit to be successful here, and I think it's just going to be such an expense for the state to try to build things correctly.
I think that's true for like most of the country in general. We're not good at public transit. You know, having come from Europe originally, right, and having been in some other countries in Europe, it's a lot more well developed there.
Yeah, it's upsetting, but I also like I think one of the things that I was so scared of moving out here and being like somebody that works for themselves as an artist, and then even once I got a great job and like moved up here, was the financial insecurity of living in a place so incredibly expensive, but not just expensive, but hard. Like it's hard to live here. And it's like stuff like that, like public transportation. I look at like the homeless problem here, and I think about like how easy it would be for any of these people to get homeless. Just you're going to lose your, like, something happens to your car. Let's say there's like a $3,000 repair and you just don't have the money for
Oh,
that.
yeah. Most
And
people do not have the financial comfort to deal with an emergency.
yeah, and then if it's your car and you're in California, you're screwed. Like now
Or
all of a sudden,
Jersey, even, to be
yeah,
honest.
Jersey, California, a lot of those places, if you lose your car, you're done. And then the public transportation doesn't really exist. And then you're trying to save up money to get your car back while paying for Ubers or taking 3-hour long commutes in each direction just to get to your job that, may or may not pay a living wage. And then next thing you know, you lose your job, and then you lose the place that you live. Because Sacramento now has more homeless people than San Francisco.
Wow.
Which is a lot of people.
Right. I mean, San Francisco certainly has a reputation for, for the homeless population, which I have seen when I was there. But yeah. So, and you mentioned, you talked about when COVID hit and you were on the road. I mean, how did you deal with that? And I mean, that's obviously very difficult for performers. You're losing, you're losing your income, your livelihood, really.
Yeah. I did what a lot of people did. I just tried to figure it out. I started selling everything online. My son and I actually started selling plasma because he was working for Feld Entertainment. He had stopped to see me in between gigs. He had left South Africa and then flown to the States before he was supposed to head to Australia.
Wow.
Yeah, and he got his letter about the company closing for the pandemic indefinitely. His position was over, so we were just selling plasma, delivering food for Instacart, selling stuff, making videos, kind of doing everything that we could to just kind of stay above water. And none of us had ever done unemployment before because we had, it was kind of wild. And then I just wound up getting a job. I became a contact tracer and then a case investigator for the health department, and then started working in the COVID.
What was that? Like, I know that was a tough job here because I think a lot of people have this, paranoia about government or whatever else. So contact tracing, I think, had a, below 50% success rate, even when they had enough staff to do it,
Oh, yeah. And then in California, we also had to deal with a lot of people that were just afraid of being undocumented.
Right.
There were so many people, like businesses that were afraid because we had to deal with businesses too. So some days you were assigned, 50 people to call. Some days it was 50 businesses. And you had to get all the information about like all the people that worked there. And then there was places like Amazon were unreachable.
Oh yeah, they don't give a shit. Yeah.
Not even a little bit. But we tried. I think that people were really surprised when I talked to people in real life. They were really surprised at the amount of resources that the state of California gave everybody. And they just, because we got hung up on a lot, we weren't able to give people all the resources they need. Like, unfortunately, like the weird conspiracy theories and like all the bonkers stuff that was getting pushed out in like news outlets and stuff, it really, it's kind of like, it's very similar to the confusion I have when people don't understand the census.
Yeah.
Like it's a level of paranoia that's uncomfortable, but it was like that with my job too. I think that like my mental health suffered for a significant amount of time doing that job. And then I was also in COVID testing, and then we moved into vaccines, which people got even crazier about.
Right. That's even a crazier audience.
I heard some of the most craziest things, like about like, I just
Still do, right? Still do. I mean,
people that don't even understand the technology they're talking about as though they're experts, and it's just wild. Like, yeah. But it was a rough time. But it was also, it was rough dealing with people that didn't believe anything was going on. But then it was also rough dealing with, people that were in a panic because of it. Like, on one hand, I had a lot of people that I created a whole new Facebook. Like the Facebook that I use now for the most part is all under my real name. And I I couldn't deal with like the racism and the homophobia of the Trump people, and then I couldn't deal with like the insanity of like, you know, the hateful nonsense happening with like my Democratic friends and like all this other stuff. And then those people also would tag me in arguments.
Oh no, that's the worst.
And so
Thank God
like,
I don't have friends like that, because no, please leave me out of it.
yeah, well, you know, it would be like, oh, like they would be talking to like one of these nut jobs that thought everything was, you know, yeah, exactly. That was they would be like getting into Facebook arguments with like QAnon people, like people like way out there, like people that we're not changing their thoughts at all. So like they're best left alone is how I see all those people. Like, okay, the spacemen's are coming to get you. I get it. That's fine. And I don't want to partake in that. But then the people that were really, really interested in what I was doing would bring me into an argument and like just tag me and be like, my friend works in COVID and they've got all the answers. And I'm like, I just had a really long day.
Yeah, don't like make me do emotional labor here for, you know,
lots of emotional labor all across the board. It was weird. So I'm like definitely coming back into society like a feral dog as a as a performer.
Yeah.
Trying to be cool. Not asking anybody questions about any of their opinions anymore.
But that's my friend Jeff on there talking about when we were on a trip in California to basically follow a band of ours. And I remember there was a moment where we're walking back from a show, and we had a couple ladies with us in our group, and there was a homeless man with a shopping cart, and he had a great line. He's like, if I don't remember word for word, but he was like, "Hey ladies, would you like to take a ride in my limo?" You know, pointing to a shopping cart. You know, it was
Did they go for a ride?
They did not. I don't think he was expecting them to. I think it was just, it was just a line. But
He would have been shocked.
It's always weird to me, like when I went to the UK, and you kind of homeless people there, but because this weird perception that we have of British accent, even homeless people sound very like posh.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about that. Maybe that's what we should do. Maybe since both of our countries have failed the unhoused population, we should just like trade. And then everybody here will be like, oh my goodness, because one thing that I have noticed, I think that when the homeless population becomes so large, I think that like regular people just have to tune them out as human beings. Like they can't, but if there's like a homeless person once every like couple of days, then you treat them like a human being. But when you're dealing with the whole problem, because I see it out here where, even in like the groups, like neighborhood groups, they're like calling the cops on people that live in their vans and like getting them cleared out, and like a lot of like really horrible stuff that they're doing to other people, and they don't think that they're part of the problem. But I think that if they had British accents,
it'd be a little different.
I think you might be onto something. I think that like they might.
I don't know. I think you just get like, you get caught off guard when somebody asks you for some change, but they're talking like they're an Oxford professor, and you're like, oh, okay.
Like,
yes,
is
sir.
this enough? Do you need more?
But yeah, it's obviously it's unfortunate, and especially when we have so much empty housing in the country, just sitting around empty, and it's a weird, very weird combination. We're just our society has a long way to go.
Yeah, I hope we get there fast. I have a lot of faith in these younger generations. They seem to be taking less bullshit than we did. Like they expect to get paid a fair living wage. They expect to like have a life and one day be able to. They're angry about not being able to buy a home. Like I'm really into.
I mean, I think they got they got a shitty hand, and I totally understand their anger. So yeah, hopefully, I certainly have more faith in them than than the old people running our country. So
yeah, I hope that they can help fix it.
Well, I don't know if there's anything else you want to hit. Everybody, please do check out Reggie's work. Your website is linked, and all the different things you do is on there. Check out her TV show appearances. Hire her to do your wedding.
Yeah.
If you're in Sacramento. So, and if you're still, because I know you're doing the tattoo convention tour. So is that still going?
Yeah, I've got about 7 events this week. I mean, this week. Oh God, no.
That seems like a lot.
No, I have about 7 conventions booked. Stuff has started to really start rolling back into the point that I'm like starting to slow it down a little bit so I can work on my company and like other things that I want to do. But thankfully I'm back on the circuit. I'm doing 2 shows in Alaska, back-to-back weekends, and I'm doing all the Texas events because I love Texas. I mean, not enough to move there. I'm not one of those Californians. Yeah. I'm a real, I'm staying here. But So Cleveland, I'm doing Cleveland the first weekend in March, and I'll do Chicago for St. Patrick's Day. So some more of them. And you can see all those conventions at villainarts.com. So they have at least, 30, 40 conventions. So they're in almost every city. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I love Sarah. Sarah's the greatest. I just saw in the chat.
But yeah, definitely check them out. I do love tattoo conventions in general. Somebody who, as a photographer, I see a lot of ink, and I appreciate the art. And it's cool to see all the different artists in the same room. I'm too finicky to get anything myself, but one day,
Yeah, and I have so many now. There's like no going back. So I don't know if I didn't have any, I don't know if I would.
I feel like there's like a critical mass at some point, after which, like, that's it, you just keep going,
Yeah. Yes. Heck yeah.
But anyway, so yes, thank you so much, Reggie. Everybody do check her out when if you have the ability to. And,
yeah, and thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm around. Hopefully I get to see you next time I'm in the city.
Yeah, next time, if you're in Philly next time, maybe we'll actually get together. Maybe we'll do another shoot sometimes. So.
Heck yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks everybody for listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Good night.
Bye.